everyone. Welcome to Royally Unfiltered, the show that takes you behind palace gates like never before. This is where tradition meets truth and nothing is off limits. This week, helping me tackle all the biggest headlines are world-renowned royal authors and acquaintances or friends from the past.
From
Hugo
way
Vickers,
long ago.
Yeah.
Hugo Vickers and Sally Bedell Smith. Thank you so much for being here. I respect both of you immensely, and I love the way that you are so blunt and honest without cruelty when it comes to some of the mistakes being made when it comes to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. And a lot of people right now are still talking about with love Meghan. So obviously that's where I wanted to keep our focus today. I will ask you, Hugo, do you see this as a win for Meghan Markle? We know that it's something that she is positioning as a win, but the numbers indicate that only just over 500,000 households watched this program in the first week. And analytically, I think that Netflix might not consider that something to be too thrilled about.
Yes, I'm rather on that. I rather take that view myself. As I've probably said many times before, the thing about the Sussexes is that they've gone down the celebrity route, so they have to keep reinventing themselves, and this is the latest sort of reinvention. And it doesn't really seem to have been a great success. I mean, back here in England, it has inspired some of the most fantastic prose from our commentary writers, I have to
Yes.
say.
Not to mention fantastic parodies.
Well, yeah, and fantastic parodies as well. I mean, one of the lines I liked particularly was, I think, was Hilary Rose in the Times, who said, imagine the faces of the children when they get their goodie bags and they're expecting a nice piece of cake, and they come back and find some seeds and some decomposable pots to plant them in. That's just one thing. No, I don't think it's a success, and I also don't think it's really. It's not really about food at the end of the day, because personally, if I was watching a program like that and I wanted to make one of these recipes, I would be quite pleased if they would actually give me some, a little spreadsheet at the end telling me what to do. This is what normally happens, doesn't it? When you do a food program, or you can get access to. So it's not really about food. It's really about promoting Meghan, and I think it's not going to be a success.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
I mean,
If you think about bath, we should not be eating bath salts, because the bath salt stories that were, coming out years ago were not great stories. Sally, go ahead.
no, I was just saying one of the things she did was she said, I put a little label on the lavender so people don't put it in their meals, as if we're all a bunch of dunderheads. But the numbers, and I checked again this morning. I mean, they're really really terrible. I mean, particularly if you compare them to Harry and Meghan, which at the end of its first week had nearly 100 million hours of viewing, and this, well, it sounds kind of impressive, had about a third of that, about 30 million, and the more telling number is the fact that people simply are not finishing it. I mean, there's an IMDb, you know what that is. That's,
Yes.
a big Hollywood measurement. And I think in the first episode got a really low rating of 2.7, and it dropped down even further to 2.1. So you have the viewers initially tuning in for curiosity more than anything else. But I think only, maybe less than 20%, and that might even be generous, follow it to the final really cringing episode that she does with Alice Waters, the legendary chef. I did watch all 8 episodes and wish I had those that time back, but I sort of forensically analyzed them. And I mean, there were so many inanities. And as Hugo referred to, I mean, it really is, at the end of the day, a show celebrating Meghan much more than it is a show about cooking. I mean, I'll give her credit. She does seem to be a foodie. She knows what it means to macerate something, which maybe many of her viewers didn't know. But she just invites these people in, whether they're professional chefs or whether they're pals who are sort of pompously labeled founder and friend, entrepreneur and friend. And all they do once the cameras start rolling is they gush about how wonderful Meghan is. So, I mean, I think it must be terribly off putting. And the other thing that people have said, well, maybe it'll be aspirational, but how can it be aspirational if you're asking people to spend hours blowing up balloons
Yeah.
or to have a professional citrus dryer or to go to a Japanese grocery store and find elements for some obscure skincare mask? I mean, there's very little that's actually attainable. And it's just it's silly
Yeah.
in many ways.
Aspirational to me is marrying a prince, and I only got 15 seconds of him, Meghan, just so she knows for
Right.
season 2. Hugo, I want to ask you and Sally, because I saw some of Sally's comments about this. You mentioned a rebrand. I think we're on our 35th or our 36th now because it's Meghan Sussex. Talk to me about I know that we call the York girls the York girls, and I know that we called Prince William and Prince Harry, Wales, but they were born into this life. I never called Princess Diana Wales. I never called the Princess of Wales Catherine Cambridge. Talk to me about Meghan wanting to use the Meghan Sussex name in the States. Is it legitimate? And do you think that there's an ulterior motive there?
Well, I think she can call herself whatever she likes. I mean, I think once again, it's like filling a little bit of space and giving us something to talk about. It's all ridiculous, really. Um, I mean, what annoys me particularly is the fact that, that they were sort of so keen to get away from being working royals and helping the royal family and sort of doing things for the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. And then they suddenly sort of dish out, which they are entitled to, that Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, in the middle of California, and then the king isn't even allowed to see these children that his name his titles go to. So I mean, theoretically she can call herself Meghan Sussex. I don't really mind about that, but I mean, I actually always call her Meghan Markle these days, because I think that's what she eventually is. But I'm not really terribly worried about what she calls herself. But I think it's just another way of producing something that can be chatted about, or it just sort of came out. But they shouldn't really be using any of these titles. But of course, the only reason that we watch Meghan Markle is because she's married to Prince Harry. Straight, simple. That's all it
Precisely.
is.
We wouldn't pay any attention to her. And actually, her two children have the surname Mountbatten Windsor,
They
and
do.
technically, so does Meghan, I guess. So I mean, as
Yes.
you point out, there are a lot of. I mean, in the aristocracy, people tend to use their titled names as their surnames. It's just sort of common practice. But I suppose my slightly cynical view is that by declaring and sort of slapping down poor Mindy for daring to call her, having the gall to call her Meghan Markle and say, and I think this is one of the lines that's going to linger for many years. Well, I am Sussex now. It was sort of a shot across the bow, really, for the king. How dare you take away this title that now means so much to me and binds me to my children and my husband. So it was, it seemed, I mean, Meghan is always working the angles. And I think that was implicit in her saying that.
Oh,
I thought that absolutely the worst thing that we ever saw, didn't you, was that fake curtsy in one of those earlier documentaries when she sort of mocked curtsying to the Queen. I was just so that if I mean I was already fed up, but if I hadn't been fed up, I would have been pretty fed up by then, don't you think? I mean,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it
Go
was
ahead.
very it was disrespectful. And
yeah.
we know, in fact, I didn't see it, but somebody said that there was an episode of Suits
Yes,
where she did do a curtsy. So this is not unfamiliar territory for her. And it just had this fake quality to it, both in Harry and Meghan, the series, and in With Love, Meghan. I was reminded the whole time I was watching it, I was reminded of a line of Truman Capote's in Breakfast at Tiffany's, where he said, Holly Golightly is a real phony. Um,
Yes.
be- and that's because she believes all the crap that you can't talk out of her. And
Yeah.
all of Holly Golightly's efforts to be authentic were in the end artificial. And the same goes for Meghan. She
Well,
is,
yeah.
in
Well,
Truman Capote's words, a real phony.
yeah, she's a phony. She's
Would
a
you?
real phony. Yes. That's one. You can't beat Truman on those things.
No, no, no.
Are
And it just popped into my head the minute I started watching her.
wildly appropriate. I do like that I have an American and someone overseas on this because Newsweek points out, and I thought that this was incredibly interesting, that the tone online when it came to, they utilized Hootsuite to monitor the tone the day the show, and actually the first 3 days of the show's release, to determine if it was primarily positive or negative feedback. And one thing they discovered was reaction hit its most negative around 8 p.m. Eastern time. That's 1 a.m. in Britain, and maintained dominance through the night as Brits were asleep. So Newsweek says the data appears to undermine the conventional wisdom that British distaste for Meghan dominates the backlash against her, and points to a new era in which strong opinions exist on both sides of the Atlantic. That has really been, I think, one of the strategies that Harry and Meghan has utilized since moving over to the States, that it was the British press that's done all of this. Meghan is totally innocent, and it's the British press that has created this false narrative and made her out to be this bad guy. And now we have the Hollywood Reporter saying they've interviewed 12 people and they've come up with additional bully allegations. Vanity Fair's scathing piece where they had additional bully allegations. Sally, at the end of the day, I felt like this was an attempt to rehabilitate her image, but is the damage already done when it comes to the United States?
I believe it is. I think for a long time, the United States sort of hung in with her. You can see it in the statistics. I mean, the show dropped out of the top 10 by the end of the first week, both in the United States and in the UK. And the same kind of diminishing viewership was seen in the United States. For example, I think on IMDb it showed 2.7% of viewers, were sticking with, we're watching the first episode, and that had dropped significantly by the episode 8. And so, they were sampling, and certainly on social media, the fans were really amping up the comments. But by the end of the week, the negative comments on social media were outnumbering the positive by 3 to 1. And a lot of that reflects the view in the United States. And I think people are looking at Meghan and seeing someone who is just trying to boost her brand, trying to create a whole new line of products, which seem really kind of irrelevant. And so I think you're right. It's not being generated primarily by the British press. And I think the Netflix people have to look at those reviews in Variety and the Hollywood Reporter, both of which were absolutely scathing, particularly the Variety one.
And she was on the cover of Variety. Like, she's given them the golden access to her. She tends to only
Yeah.
with outlets that are wildly kiss uppy. I'm going to behave with my words here, but brown nosers. And she usually works with People Magazine, Harper's Bazaar. Those are the two that gave her the glowing review.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, Hugo, I loved in this report from Newsweek, it says the majority of praise for Meghan, and Sally just alluded to this, appeared online before the show aired, with Newsweek reporting, therefore, it may not indicate organic audience reaction to the show that was not yet available, but it may signal an effective marketing strategy. A part of the reason I feel like Harry and Meghan are so obsessed with being authorities and having a voice when it comes to social media activity is because they don't like the negative social media activity that surrounds them, and they like to be able to control it in a little, in some way, shape, or form. It did feel like there was a not organic effort online to make everybody so excited for this show that anybody with any sort of common sense was like, this is not this, there's nothing authentic about this. Is it, will they get caught trying to manipulate things like this in the future?
I think they will. I think they've already got caught, actually.
Yeah.
I think it's what surprises me is how people are still so interested in them. I mean, here we are talking about them. I guess we have to. But I was in England when they got married. I mean, I was in Windsor that day, and I mean, the enthusiasm and the excitement and the possibilities were huge. And whatever she says, there were people very, very positive. I mean, you couldn't move for the excitement for people there. And then, of course, perhaps I'm repeating myself a bit, but the Queen gave them the whole of the Commonwealth to explore, and they were both seemed to be committed to that. I mean, I've seen him in the Commonwealth, and he was very, very good at it, and it wasn't good enough. So it makes me think that there was always a little plan. What surprised me is that she left and implemented the plan in the lifetime of the Queen, which I think is pretty unforgivable, because I happen to know that she, caused the Queen a lot of distress in the last
Yes.
couple of years of her life, and so. On she goes. And from what
Well,
Sally has been saying and from what everybody else has been saying, it just seems to be getting worse and worse. And there will come a point, surely, when they've got nothing else to say and people will get bored with them because that is the nature of celebrity.
yes, and they are, I go back to this, that in Britain, where Harry was once one of the most popular members of the royal family, 21, this was a recent poll, 21% consider him not to be a member of the royal family. They call him a celebrity. And and then, not to mention the opinion polls, which have him slightly above Prince Andrew, who is now a total pariah. I don't know how you recover from that. I mean, I think we're all looking at this series as, yes, a rebranding effort, obviously an effort to make a lot of money, and to try and put all the horrible trashing that they did of the royal family behind them. But it exists. It is the backdrop for everything we see now. We know what she said about them to Oprah. We know what she and Harry said in that series, which was a huge success for Netflix. Um, but the worst case scenario, I think, which they would be utterly insane to do, would be for Meghan to write a memoir and settle even more scores. Because I don't see how this lifestyle program can continue beyond the autumn. And it isn't a renewal, by the way. They had all those episodes in the can as of January, and there isn't even an opportunity for them to re-edit, or it is what it is. And it is, they had her, they did a preview showing her wedding dress designer, who's obviously going to be featured in one of the episodes. So it's hard to know where she could turn. I mean, she's made so many mistakes. And getting back to what Hugo was alluding to, I was out there in Windsor, for the wedding, and the world was in love with Meghan. I don't know, Hugo, if you remember, but when you came into the train station, there was an enormous sign, or it was a sort of mosaic of Harry and Meghan celebrating them. It stayed there for months and months, and the enthusiasm for them, and the Queen, contrary to the things that Meghan said, particularly to Oprah, that there was a racist family, and the
Yeah.
Queen looked at Meghan as an asset,
Yeah.
and she did give Meghan and Harry this wonderful platform with the Commonwealth, with the head of the Commonwealth universities, and there were two or three other platforms. and she wanted them to go around the world and represent her. They gave it 18 months.
Yeah,
And
that's as long as she was married to Trevor Ingleson, by the way. I realized that the
yes,
other day.
well, and I mean, and Hugo's probably heard this as well, but based on people I know who were working with them, she had her own agenda from day
Oh yeah,
one. She
definitely.
was not listening to anybody. And she also really wanted a lot more money. And she was not satisfied with what Harry had, even with an ample allowance from his father and a considerable legacy from Diana and others in the family, the late Queen Mother. But Meghan had much bigger sums in mind, and she really believed that if they took their show on the road and went to Hollywood, that they could get a lot more money, which they have gotten. And Harry has made a lot of money from his book, but at a terrible, terrible cost. Um, a rift with the royal family that may never be repaired.
I agree. She mentions the Oprah Winfrey interview. We're 4 years out from that. I
Mm.
feel like when I watch the Oprah Winfrey interview, that is the real Meghan. I think when I watch With Love Meghan, that's somebody putting on a show. But in that Oprah Winfrey interview, that angry, bitter, vindictive person that I see, to me, that is who she truly is. Do you get a sense of is it somewhere in the middle, or do you get a sense when watching some of these shows, whether it be Harry and Meghan the documentary or With Love Meghan or the Oprah Winfrey interview, do you get a sense of who the real Meghan is? Because she's a chameleon. She changes constantly.
Well, you just have
Yeah,
to.
I mean, I
Yeah,
think I think she does. I think you're right. I think we saw she was angry in the Oprah interview, and you could see that. With Love, Meghan is a very heavily scripted show. Everything she's saying is I don't who knows how many takes she had to do, but it is not reality. It was not her kitchen. We probably assumed that the beekeeping place was hers. We don't even know if that massive garden was hers. And so we are getting something that is just, as you say, a rebranding exercise. And I mean, there are several quotes that have sort of lingered with people. One is that I am Sussex now, and the other is when she was walking through that extravagant garden with Alice Waters in the last episode. And she looked around and she said, well, people can have a little piece of this in their tiny apartments in New York and their flats in London. And the best she could offer was maybe they could have a little window box. But it was so patronizing and and oblivious and tone deaf for her to say things like that. And maybe that was authentic Meghan. Maybe she really feels that way. But I do think, Kinsey, that she is a performer above all. I believe that when she went back to California, she probably should have tried to resume acting because she might have made something of herself.
Absolutely, Hugo.
Also, don't you think we need to look at the facts? The fact is she's rejected everybody one after another. Her father, her first husband, Jessica Mulroney, her Canadian chef boyfriend, the entire British royal family. There's a pattern here which is pretty unpleasant. And as you say, Kinsey, when you saw her in the Oprah thing, and if you occasionally get a clip of it, I mean, especially after having sat through that sugary production the other day, suddenly you get a bit of Oprah and you think, oh my God, this is terrifying. This is what's lurking behind that facade. And that's
Yes.
what's so unpleasant. And so you just look at the facts. And of course, I personally was just wondering how long it'll be before she rejects somebody else, in her
Mm,
life.
no,
Well, I
that's
think there's something implicit in that, maybe. But I mean, Harry is the kind of dangling question. And we had him in fleeting moments in this series. One that nobody else picked up on, but I thought was totally bizarre, was in the second episode when she was talking about making a balloon arch, and suddenly you heard this voice, and it was from May of 2020, and he was saying, "Oh, what are you doing, my love?" And she said, "I'm making a balloon arch for Archie's first birthday." And he says, "Doesn't look like an arch." And she said, "Oh, it will be." And I mean, it was just a peculiar little interlude in there. But I thought that at the very end, when he was actually visible on camera and hugging people and telling Meghan she was the greatest, I thought then, as I've thought in seeing him in many other settings, that there's a kind of look of apprehensiveness on his face.
Yeah.
He doesn't look comfortable. And he has this sort of weird, giddy laugh that you hear every once in a while. He has, in my view, become, I mean, he's the reason Meghan is who Meghan is today, but he has really become sort of her accessory. There was a line in People magazine in the interview she gave before the series in which she said, "Harry likes to watch me being creative." And I'm thinking, is that any way to spend your days? Instead of having lunch, they have a day date. And it's all so sort of artificial. And who talks that way? And what does Harry do every day? He has the Invictus Games, but they're every 2 years. He has this travel thing that he does. He has Better Up mental health, a company of sorts, but they have to be on the margins. And I mean, the fact is that Meghan wants to be in the limelight. She wants to be at center stage. That was evident even in the Invictus Games in Vancouver. A lot of the footage was of her, and I think, and then she laughed, of course. but I think what's going to become of Harry is a real question right now.
Yeah, I mean, he used to
And
be Captain General of the Royal Marines, and then the next minute he's lying barefoot under a tree in California. I mean, what
yeah,
sort of is that? I mean, he was given so much, and he was very good at it, wasn't he, Sally? I mean, he was very
he
good at.
was,
I
he
saw him
was, he
in the Caribbean, and playing cricket with the children, and he looked committed, like you are when you're putting something into life as opposed to taking something out of it. And that was that he was so good at it, and the kids loved him. They thought he was amazing. And now as you say, he's just hanging around, as an appendage, and it must be desperate. Must be really desperate.
it must be. I mean, people I've talked to in the UK call him a lost book. And he does have that he does, exude that kind of um, feeling that he doesn't quite know where he fits in. All of his old friends. I mean, there was a line in the Anita Singh review in the Telegraph saying, "Meghan says everybody's welcome." Well, everybody except her father, her father-in-law, her stepmother-in-law, her brother-in-law, her sister-in-law, and also Piers Morgan, which I thought was very funny.
I did.
But
You
it
mentioned
just
that
goes
in
to
your.
show, and not to mention her own family, her
Yeah.
father. But it just speaks volumes that there are all these people that she has run out of her
Yeah.
life, and Harry's life, all of his friends, and maybe a few, but it is, to my mind, a kind of effort on her part to kind of encircle him and control him. And I don't even know how often he's able to speak to his father, who has barely met his grandchildren. And of course, her father, she just shut the door completely for reasons that seem pretty trivial, actually, when you
And
go
I
back to 2018.
I do think that at least here in the States, because King Charles is so active and we see him so often, because this is important to him that he puts himself out there and he's almost a workaholic. I don't think we acknowledge enough that he has cancer and that
Yeah,
he's he's seeking treatment for cancer, and to not know your grandchildren, to not have access to your son. And I'm not a therapist, or I certainly wouldn't claim to be an expert in the field, but to alienate your significant other from their entire family feels abusive in some way, shape, or form. You did mention, Sally, that great quote about Pierce Morgan, but I also loved on your Substack, which is amazing. If you haven't subscribed, everybody should subscribe. You quote, it says, notwithstanding the comic potential of Meghan's lofty pronouncements, I enjoy doing things with intention. Meghan is not somebody that I typically associate with understanding consequences. So the fact that she's like, I do everything with intention, are you sitting there going, what was your intention behind calling the entire royal family racist and then backtracking and saying that never happened? Is one of her problems the fact that her memory must be incredibly poor, potentially because of all of the pot smoke around her house? I don't, which is horrible to say. I'm sorry, but she has a horrible memory. You're saying you grew up on Jack in the Box, but in a Food Network show, you're saying you grew up farm to table when you were judging little kids making food. A few months ago, you told Variety that In-N-Out Burger had memorized your order because you and Prince Harry spend so much time in the drive-through. It's like, how is part of the problem that she does not stay consistent with her commentary on herself?
Well, I think when you start to lie, which she has done repeatedly, it's awfully hard to keep things straight. And there was internal consistency even in the program when you said she claimed to have been a latchkey child who grew up on fast food. And then in the next episode, she said, oh, my mother was a travel agent and she took me all over the world and I tasted all these wonderful foods. And then we had gumbo and soul food and everything was very flavorful and wonderful. Well, which is it?
Right.
And that that is a through line, not only starting with the interview with Oprah and then the series that they did and then this. She can't keep her story straight, and I don't know, maybe it is poor memory, but I think she really, in a sense, she really doesn't know who she is. And she's trying on all kinds of guises to see which one sticks, but so far none of them has.
Well, many years ago, I was writing something about her before she married, and it was an interview I accessed in which she said, my dad always told me the importance of the handwritten thank you letter. So I thought, let's put this to the test, because I wrote a book about St. George's Chapel where she was going to get married. So I sent her a copy with a sort of ghastly inscription saying, shortly you'll be adding another chapter to the illustrious history of this wonderful place.
Aww.
And I sent it off. Wasn't that nice of me? Nothing came back. And then Princess Eugenie got married, and all my lay stewards and every single person, even people that the Duchess of York didn't know, all got a beautiful photograph of the bride with their dear John, dear Henry, or whatever it was, signed by Sarah. And this arrived within a week of the wedding. And then about 2 or 3 days later, I wondered whether it was coincidental. I got a letter from Kensington Palace from an assistant private secretary, perfectly nice letter actually typed, saying she was too busy to thank people personally for all the many gifts that had come in. And then it was PP'd by somebody else. I thought, really, not actually quite good enough.
No, not quite good enough.
Absolutely not. You're right. That is so thoughtful, because that it's supposed to be that place is so special. That's my next read. Thank you for letting me know that exists. I want to ask you, Hugo, because we've mentioned Prince Harry and his probably the aimlessness of it all. He has been so fierce in protecting the children, and so fierce when it comes to how they are owed an element of privacy now that they are in the States that they believe they wouldn't have received in the UK. Now Meghan's putting pictures of Lily all over social media. I mean,
Well, of
whether
course
it's the back of their head or whatever, I think that it almost instigates more curiosity. Is this going to be a place where Prince Harry and Meghan butt heads, along with the fact that she's chasing this fame that he's rejected all of his life?
Well, I think it's very interesting that, I mean, it's very annoying, these photographs, because obviously we are interested in these children. I've actually always felt terribly sorry for them from the moment that they were born. But then to see the back of the head of this child, when I say that, what I'm worried about is as they grow up, I mean, they're going to suddenly wake up and discover that they could have had a wonderful English life, that they have cousins and they could have had fun and they could have done all the sort of things that kids do. And what's going to happen, Anyway, that's in the future. But so we just get the back of the head, or we get a little clip or something. So they are being used for this, and that is monstrous. And they are, again, as I say, they are also the king's grandchildren, and in a way that's what she's doing. She's using them as bait for the program. I think that's odious.
Yes, and I noticed that, and it was certainly evident in one of the teasers where you had her kissing the back of Harry's head, and you had her kissing the back of Archie's head, and then you had a little tiny glimpse, a little bit. And here you have the Prince and Princess of Wales with their children. We've seen many, many images of them. And then you have this, again, you get back to this kind of phony aspect of Meghan playing peekaboo, really, with her children. And it's a kind of affectation that people who view themselves as important and celebrities, that they feel the need to kind of shield them from what? People walking around Montecito obviously see them, but I think back, way back to say when the late Queen Elizabeth II was a child. I mean, she was out there in photographs when she was 4 years old. And, it was a less dangerous world in those days. And Harry and Meghan may have concerns about security, but there doesn't seem to be any downside in showing what they look like. I mean, they showed them as babies, but they don't show them now. And it seems somehow manipulative, as you point out, Hugo, that they're being used for the purpose of teasing viewers into signing up. They were also in a different kitchen, which making cookies, and you think, oh, are they going to actually use their own kitchen? And that another way of enticing people in? But it's all very premeditated, and I'm sure Meghan thinks smartly, strategically planned, but again, it's off-putting,
Yes.
because you just wonder how genuine it really might be. And my instinct is not.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Hugo, I remember specifically Meghan and Harry telling us that they did not want a title for Archie when he was born. They were very specific, in the way that it was announced, it made it sound like they were above, they were above it. They don't need a title for their son. And now these are two children that have titles in America. I mean, are they sitting in school? Are they sitting in their little private school in Montecito being referred to as Princess Lily? Because I die a little inside when I imagine that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was worse than that,
I do
wasn't it?
too.
It was worse than that because if you remember that she was in the Oprah interview, she was pretending that they were going to be denied titles, specifically. And
Yes.
she was playing the racist card on that one. I mean, and the titles are always absolutely, it's set down by the George V established what titles people would get. And so basically, the sons and daughters of the sovereign are royal highnesses, and the sons and daughters of sons of the sovereign are royal highnesses. And people keep saying, oh, Princess Anne didn't want her children to have titles. There was never any question of them having titles because she was a princess. So there was never going to be and Princess Margaret's titles didn't get anything from her. They got it from their father. So, that's just all ridiculous. But I do think it's very bad. I think it's very bad indeed, and I just think it's going to be terribly difficult for those children growing up. Prince Edward was very sensible. He decided that his children should not, they are entitled to be Royal Highnesses, Prince and Princess, but he thought it would be easier for them going through school not to be. And I think he was right.
Absolutely. And I think, if they were in England and carrying the titles, Princess Archie and Princess Lilibet, that would be, that would be fine. But the fact that they're living in Montecito and having those titles is ridiculous when they're not part of the royal family except by lineage. And I think it's a big mistake. I mean, obviously they were conferred those titles when Charles took the throne. They are theirs by right.
Automatic, yeah,
But
automatic.
I mean, I think, I mean, it's, as I said, Meghan sort of threw down the gauntlet. How dare you take our Sussex titles away? It's something that could be done. It's a little complicated, perhaps with letters patent, but more likely through Parliament. And what we would end up with if they lost Sussex, which is now integral to their branding, she would rather ironically be Princess Henry.
Oof.
Which I don't know if that would please her all that much.
Oh, she would make sure that Tyler Perry kept calling her Princess Meghan on Twitter so that everybody else would follow suit. I'll ask you just a final question, and I would like answers from both of you if possible. Hugo, Netflix, was there a return on investment here? Do you think they'll continue with their relationship when it comes to the Sussexes? Have they generated enough interesting content? Also, Meghan's still got a podcast coming out. You said she's going to run out of things to say. I feel like we're there. I feel like after watching her pour one bag of pretzels into another bag of pretzels, I truly felt like we were there. So talk to me about what you see the future being for Harry and Meghan.
Well, as Sally said, they'd already filmed season 2, so obviously they want to get as much back as possible. But I don't know. Meghan Markle, as I will continue to call her, probably does have an enormous number of followers on Instagram and thinks maybe that is enough to just keep things going. I don't know, but I suspect, if I had to put my money on it, that Netflix will not be renewing any contracts in the future. But I have to confess, I don't know.
Good, honest answer.
I tend to agree with Hugo. I think particularly if this had been a breakout hit, they might have renewed it for a 3rd and 4th season. But I see, based on all the statistics, that viewership is dwindling, and people are losing interest in it. It just doesn't seem like something that could continue. The big thing that she's pinning her hopes on now is As Ever, which I think she's presented it in a very confusing way. For the life of me, I can't figure out why she didn't just revive the Tig, which at least had a history. And it has, I mean, As Ever doesn't actually have a real pop as a brand. It's what some people sign their correspondence As Ever, but it just doesn't come together. And you look at the 8 products that they rolled out that aren't even available yet. I mean, you wonder how in the world that can be made a success, particularly if you contrast it with the King, who has huge platforms for all of his products. And she really doesn't. I mean, does Netflix have a whole division that we don't know about that is, specializes in food and household items and all that? I doubt it. And so having Netflix as as her business partner seems to carry a lot of question marks.
I'm curious to see what she does with the Limonada podcast, which is now, we heard about a year ago, at least a year ago.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see if it fits in this signature, whether it's with Love Meghan, As Ever, this signing off theme, or if she's going to try to do something similar to Archetypes, which I don't. The publicists did an amazing job of Meghan walking around collecting trophies for that podcast. But if it would have been an analytical success, there's no way Spotify would have shown them the door, which they did less than a year after she launched that show. Hugo, you look like you were going to say something. Did you want to say something?
No. I was just agreeing with you.
Oh, well, I love that. Do that more. All right. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. If you agree with us, the viewer, if you agree with us, disagree with us, let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. And make sure you purchase the amazing books by Mr. Hugo Vickers and Sally Bedell Smith, because I love them. They're on my bookshelf, and you will not regret it. Available on Amazon or wherever you get books. So again, thank you so much for talking to me today. I really enjoyed this chat.